Hello and welcome. Today we are talking all about the life of Lana Turner, and y'all, Lana's life story has everything. We're talking 8 marriages to 7 different men, a true crime story, and Sean Connery kicking some butt and taking some names. It is the stuff that Hollywood legends are made of. We are going to cover it all in today's episode of Beauty Biography, where every Friday we talk about the life of a beauty icon. Today it's Lana, while creating an inspired makeup look. Let's dive in. Lana Turner was born Julia Jean Turner on February 8th, 1921. This makes Lana an Aquarius. Now, a lot of people actually think that Aquarius is a water sign, I think because it has the word aqua in it, but it is actually an air sign. The most obvious Aquarius trait that we're going to see in Lana is going to be that she has a very quick wit and this just airy quality about her that really make her someone that people want to be friends with. They make her a very sought-after companion. Lana would end up being really close friends with a lot of her fellow Hollywood actresses back in the day, including her best pal, Ava Gardner. Lana was born in Wallace, Idaho. It is a small mining community in the Panhandle region of Idaho. Lana is actually our first beauty here on this channel that is from Idaho, the first one we're discussing. I don't personally know anyone from Idaho, but it seems like a really lovely place. I've looked at some pictures. So Lana was an only child. Her parents were Mildred and John. John was a miner and Mildred was a housewife. Now, Lana's mother, Mildred, was only 17 years old when she gave birth to Lana. Mildred had actually met Lana's father, John, when she was only 14 years old, and at that time, John was 24 years old, which is gross. John had been working at a mine in Oklahoma, and Mildred's father was a mine inspector. So he had gone to inspect the mine that John worked at and taken Mildred with him. And I bet he really regretted that decision because, very justifiably so, he was not very happy with the idea of this 24-year-old man trying to court his 14-year-old daughter. He was against this. He forbade it, but the two actually soon after meeting, they eloped out west and ended up in Idaho. A few years later, they have Lana, and John opens a dry cleaning service as well as working in the mine. Even though he has 2 jobs, the family still struggles a lot financially. Growing up, Lana was actually known by the name Judy, and from a very early age, she enjoyed performing. She would put on little dance routines at the Elks Lodge where her dad was a member, and she would perform at other small community events. Once she performed in a fashion show that her mom was part of, like a community fashion show. When Lana was 6 years old, her family moved to San Francisco. They were hoping to just be able to have more opportunities and be able to provide more for the family. So Mildred, John, Lana all moved to San Francisco, but shortly after they get there, Mildred and John decide to separate. This is difficult for Lana, and things only get worse when a few years later, when Lana is 9 years old, on the evening of December 14th, 1930, her father John goes to play craps, which I think is a dice game. I think it's a dice game. Yeah, definitely dice. So John goes to play craps and he wins some money. He puts the money in his sock and he heads home, but he never makes it home. The next day, he's found beaten to death and his sock and shoe are missing. So obviously somebody knew he won that money. They murdered him for it and stole the money. But the robbery and the murder are never solved. And that's very traumatizing for Lana. She really never quite fully got over it because obviously there was never any justice. Following John's death, Lana and Mildred began moving around Northern California quite a bit. Mildred worked as a beautician, often 80 hours a week, to try to support her and Lana. And because this was such a financial burden, sometimes Lana would go stay with family friends as they were moving around to kind of, help take the burden off of Mildred a little bit, because if Lana was staying with a family friend, then, Mildred didn't have to worry about feeding her that day. So they moved around a lot, and Lana would often, just be staying with different people that Mildred met and knew. And one of these families in Modesto actually ends up physically abusing Lana and treating her basically like a servant. They have her clean and cook and just are terrible to her. But Lana does have a better experience in Stockton, California, where she's staying with a family that are Catholic. And while she's staying with them, they're very nice to her, very lovely to her, and they take her to Mass with them. Lana had been baptized a Protestant, but she asked her mother for permission to convert to Catholicism. Her mother says okay, and Lana formally converts to Catholicism. Following her conversion, she would actually attend the Convent of Immaculate Conception in San Francisco, hoping that she would one day become a nun, but we know she's going to have 8 marriages, so quite obviously the nun thing does not pan out. Sometime in the mid-1930s, Lana's mother developed some respiratory problems, and the doctor suggests that she move to a drier climate, so they head south for Los Angeles. Soon after they moved to Los Angeles in 1936, one of the most popular discovery legends in Hollywood history takes place. Lana is a junior at Hollywood High School, and she skips a typing class to go to the Top Hat malt shop and buy a Coca-Cola. While she's at the malt shop, William R. Wilkerson, the publisher of The Hollywood Reporter, which is still in print to this day, he sees Lana. He thinks she is gorgeous, and he asks her if she wants to be in movies. She replies, "I'll have to ask my mother." Lana's mother does give her permission, and William refers Lana to the talent agent Zeppo Marx. He is the youngest of the infamous Marx brothers, who were an incredibly well-known vaudeville act. So this is where the legend of being discovered in a soda shop comes from, because it actually happened to Lana Turner. And this story very quickly became just overnight Hollywood legend, Hollywood lore. It's just such a common theme of someone being discovered in these random everyday places. And these stories really start with the discovery of Lana Turner and her story. Later that year in December, Zeppo introduces Lana to the director Mervyn LeRoy at Warner Brothers. He signs Lana to her first contract, $50 a week. Today that would be $950 a week. So that's really not bad to come from, nothing, basically. Lana once said that it would sometimes be weeks that she would only eat saltine crackers and water because her mom and her could not afford anything else. So to go from that level of poverty to $950 a week overnight had to be incredibly surreal. Mervyn becomes Lana's mentor, and he suggests that Lana, who is still known as Judy at this time, he suggests she start using the name Lana Turner. Lana agrees. She begins using that stage name immediately, and a few years later, she legally changes her name as well. Lana's film debut is in the 1937 film They Won't Forget. Lana only appears on screen for a few moments. She plays a teenage murder victim, but she gets a very lovely note in The Hollywood Reporter, and she gets the nickname the Sweater Girl because in the film, she wears a very form-fitting sweater. And she would later muse that a lot of the reason everyone was so fixated on the sweater was because back then, bras were basically made of silk. There weren't cups really in bras, like firm cups, that conceal things as well. So back then, most bras were like silk or satin or something like that. They were flimsy material. So that drew a lot of attention to her chest. And she was only 16 years old, so this was horrifying for her. Lana actually once told Phil Donahue her experience when she saw the premiere of the movie was she was mortified because she was with her mother. She's only 16 years old, and her first kind of realization that, she's reached womanhood was watching herself in this movie in this form-fitting sweater and everyone talking about it. She was just absolutely mortified. And she said it took her years to really get over that because she just felt really self-conscious because of that, which makes so much sense and really just shows you that, you know, lately I think a lot of people have been paying attention to how much our culture has sexualized teenage girls. A lot of people have been talking about Britney Spears. There was a new documentary about that. But this is the 1930s, and they were doing the same thing. This is not new. This is an ongoing problem that our society has had for a long time. Later in 1937, Lana's mentor, Mervyn, he's hired as an executive at MGM. Mervyn asked Jack Warner, the boss at Warner Brothers, who Lana is in a contract with, he says, please let Lana come with me to MGM. Jack says, okay, because he thought that Lana would not amount to anything. Big mistake. Huge. Lana goes with Mervyn to MGM and she signs a contract for $100 a week, almost $1,900 in today's money. So this move to MGM gets Lana twice what she was making with Warner Brothers. Lana's first starring role was supposed to be an adaptation of The Sea Wolf, where she would appear opposite Clark Gable, but the film ends up not being made, so her first big film with MGM is Love Finds Andy Hardy, where she appears opposite Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland. While filming, she becomes good friends with Judy Garland, and she also completes her studies with a social worker, which allows her to graduate high school. So Lana is now a high school graduate, and her first big film with MGM is a box office success. The success of this film and Lana's role in it convinces the head of MGM, Louis B. Mayer, that Lana could become the next Jean Harlow. Jean had passed away at the height of her career only a few months earlier, and the studio desperately wants a beautiful, blonde sex symbol to fill that void that Jean left. So Louis gives Lana really good roles in movies like Rich Man, Poor Girl, Dramatic School, and Calling Dr. Kildare. Lana's big breakout, though, comes in 1939 with Dancing Co-ed. The film is a commercial success, and it lands Lana a cover on Look magazine. Lana's co-star in this movie is a bandleader named Artie Shaw, and in February of the next year, 1940, Lana gets tons of publicity when she elopes to Las Vegas with Artie Shaw. Now, if you've watched my Ava Gardner Beauty Biography, then you will already know that Artie Shaw was not a nice guy. Artie was very mean to Lana. He treated her like she was stupid and just uncultured, basically. And so this marriage only lasts for 4 months. A few months later, Lana appears in her first musical, Two Girls on Broadway. Her second musical premieres the following year, and it is the film Ziegfeld Girl. This is going to be a very big movie for several Hollywood stars that we know and love. In this movie, Lana portrays Sheila Reagan, an alcoholic aspiring actress who is based on real-life actress and Ziegfeld Girl, Lillian Lorraine. For a little bit of backstory here, Ziegfeld Girls were the showgirls that appeared in Florenz Ziegfeld's Broadway revues that were known as the Ziegfeld Follies. These were like these huge shows with showgirls, and it was just like a huge revue. The equivalent nowadays would be the big shows at Radio City Music Hall with the Rockettes. This was a similar concept, really. This was like the predecessor to that, and these took place between 1907 and 1931. Now, Lillian Lorraine, who Lana's character in the movie is based on, was one of the most notable Ziegfeld girls. She was the mistress of Florenz Ziegfeld himself, so Lana portrays the film version of Lillian, called Sheila in the movie, and this role in this film is a huge turning point. First of all, the film is wildly successful. Lana stars opposite some of the biggest stars of the time: James Stewart, Julie Garland, Hedy Lamarr. Like, this is a star-studded movie. It is a huge box office smash hit, and the success leads to MGM giving Lana a 50% raise in her own personal makeup artist and trailer, which is goals. Secondly, Lana becomes even closer to Judy Garland, who she had already worked with and become friends with. The two really get very close while filming this movie, and they remain lifelong friends. And last, this movie is really big for Lana because it inspires her. She will say that this is the first role of hers that made her really interested in the art of acting. It made her really interested in the artistic expression of her career path. So this film is a changing point for Lana. Following the success of Ziegfeld Girl, Lana takes a supporting role in the film Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Lana was originally going to be the female lead in the film, but the male star, Spencer Tracy, specifically asked for Ingrid Bergman. So Ingrid Bergman ends up getting the lead, and Lana is demoted to a smaller role, that of the ingenue. But Lana is so popular that MGM still gives her top billing on the film. Lana is next cast opposite Clark Gable in the Western movie Honky Tonk. If you recall, MGM was really hoping that Lana could be the next Jean Harlow. And Jean Harlow during her career had amazing on-screen chemistry with Clark Gable. They were just like America's favorite leading lady and man duo. So MGM is hoping that they can replicate that chemistry with Lana and Clark Gable. And this will be the first of 4 films where Lana and Clark star opposite each other. The two actually do have really good on-screen chemistry. As a result, the films that they star in together were often made more popular and successful because gossip columns would often imply that there was a romantic relationship going on between Clark and Lana. However, the two never had a romantic relationship. Lana would later say that she adored Clark, but they were always only just friends. And she said rather infamously that, quote, "When 6 o'clock came, he went his way and I went mine." Tragically, they would be working on one film together when Carol Lombard, Clark's wife, was killed in a plane crash. And Lana described just how devastating that was for Clark and how terrible she felt, because a lot of people in Hollywood kind of made up this rumor that the reason that Carol took the plane that she was on when she died, was because she wanted to get to Clark, because she thought that Clark and Lana were having an affair, which is just completely only speculation and really terrible to put on a person. In July of 1942, Lana meets husband number 2, an actor turned restaurateur. There's no N in it, and so I don't know how to say it. He owns a restaurant, and his name is Steve Crane. The two meet at a dinner party in Los Angeles, and they elope to Las Vegas only 1 week later. 4 months after they elope, though, they find out that Steve's divorce from his previous wife is not yet final. So, oops, Steve is a bigamist now. The two very quickly annul their marriage and wait for Steve to get his first marriage divorce finalized. Soon after their marriage is annulled, Lana discovers that she is pregnant. So Steve hurries up, he gets on the divorce, he starts working on that. And in March of 1943, the pair are once again married, this time legally above board. No bigamy going on, in Tijuana. Lana had a very difficult pregnancy because she had Rh negative blood. Nowadays, women who have Rh negative blood, they get a shot during pregnancy that prevents their blood antigens from basically attacking the blood of their unborn child and causing fetal anemia. But it's 1943 and they don't have this therapeutic yet. So Lana has a very difficult pregnancy, and at one point her doctors actually encourage her to undergo a termination to avoid life-threatening complications. Lana is determined, though, to give birth to her child, and her baby girl Cheryl is born on July 25th, 1943. Lana's Rh negative status does result in Cheryl being born with a nearly fatal alloimmune condition, but Cheryl does recover. This is something that it's not going to recur. It's like a one-time thing, and the baby does recover and everything is okay. Thank goodness. But 1 year after the birth of Cheryl, Lana does decide to divorce Steve. She cites that he is a heavy drinker and he is got kind of a gambling problem and is constantly unemployed. So those are, pretty solid reasons to decide to call it quits. 2 years later, in 1946, Lana, who has up to this point mostly starred in comedies and musicals, she begins to expand into more dramatic roles. That year, her film, The Postman Always Rings Twice, is released. It is a film noir in which Lana plays Cora, a femme fatale. The film receives glowing reviews, and Lana's performance gets a lot of attention. The New York Times goes as far as calling it the role of her career. The movie is also a box office success, and as a result, MGM decides to continue to give Lana more dramatic roles, like the 1947 historical drama Green Dolphin Street. Lana's role in that film was actually initially going to be played by Katharine Hepburn, but MGM replaced Katharine with Lana, and no one was more surprised by this than Lana. She was really surprised, but very excited because it was her first starring role that did not center on her looks. Her looks were not a big part of the plot. She loses 15 pounds and dyes her hair darker for this performance. It is during filming this movie that Lana begins an affair with Tyrone Power. She considered him to be the love of her life, but the two would never marry. Lana discovered that she was pregnant with Tyrone's child in late 1947, but Tyrone is married, and after consulting with some friends, she feels like she just cannot carry the pregnancy to term, so she does have a termination. Following this, she has romantic affairs with Frank Sinatra, who will later go on to marry her dear friend Ava Gardner, and Howard Hughes, who was alive in the 1940s that did not have some kind of run-in with Howard Hughes. He was everywhere. Lana next beats out Vivian Leigh and Jennifer Jones to star in the romantic drama Cass Timberlane. She gets fantastic reviews for it, and she follows that up with another film with Clark Gable, Homecoming. This film marks the peak of Lana's career. She was MGM's most popular star. She's earning $226,000 per year, which today is about $2.6 million. And this makes her one of the highest paid leading ladies in the US at the time. Around the time that Lana appears in her first Technicolor film, The Three Musketeers, her husband number 3 enters the picture. Bob Topping is a millionaire socialite, which is kind of funny to hear a man be referred to as a socialite, but Bob Topping was one. He is from an extremely wealthy family. His brother Dan at the time owned the New York Yankees. Lana and Bob meet and they begin dating. Soon after they start dating, he proposes to her at the 21 Club in New York City by dropping a diamond ring in her martini glass. Lana and Bob are married in April of 1948 in Greenwich, Connecticut, and soon after their wedding, Lana learns she is pregnant. Quite sadly though, early the next year, Lana will go into premature labor and give birth to a baby boy who is stillborn. The combination of the grief and the trauma of this, and also a little bit of a rift between Lana and MGM because she had kind of skipped out on them for her honeymoon the year before. This leads to about a 2-year break before Lana's next film is released. That film is A Life of Her Own. It was directed by George Cukor, who is best known for directing films like The Philadelphia Story, Gaslight, and My Fair Lady. All great films, and he was a great director, but unfortunately for Lana, this film is probably his least successful film. It had pretty bad reviews, and it did not do well at the box office. After the flop of A Life of Her Own, MGM tries to rebrand Lana once again. They put her back into musicals, taking her out of dramatic roles. Their first attempt at this is the musical Mr. Imperium, released in March of 1941, but this film is also a flop. Lana thought that the script was stupid, and it turns out she was right because people didn't really like it. Lana is struggling professionally at this time, and she's also struggling personally. She's having a lot of financial problems and suffering from chronic depression as a result of this. In September of 1951, Lana has a mental health crisis that peaks in her attempting suicide. Her business manager, Benton Cole, thankfully is there. He's able to call 911 and get to Lana in time for her to be saved. And Lana does begin to recover after this with the support of her friends. Things do look up for Lana, though, when she next stars opposite Kirk Douglas in the film The Bad and the Beautiful. Kind of funny, we were just talking about The Bold and the Beautiful. And now The Bad and the Beautiful. That film is a critical and box office success, and Lana is once again getting favorable reviews. There is bad news in her personal life, though. That same year, Lana divorces Bob Topping. Remember Bob? It's been a while since we checked in with him. So Lana says Bob has a gambling and a drinking problem, which is not ideal, and the two go their separate ways. And it's now dawning on me that Lana has really bad taste in men. That's not dawning on me, that I have known. But I'm now I don't know why, just now realizing the pattern of men that are drinking and gambling. And then who in Lana's life was drinking and gambling when he was murdered? Her father. So these cycles repeat. Please be good to your children. Please be a good example for your children. Please try to work through your issues. Whew. So husband number 3 is gone. And the next spring in 1953, Lana relocates to Europe for 18 months to make 2 films, Flame in the Flesh and Betrayed. Betrayed would be Lana's 4th and final film with Clark Gable. Lana has a filming break in September of that year, and she returns to the US during this break, and she marries the actor Lex Barker. So Lex Barker becomes husband number 4. In 1955, MGM gets a new studio head, and he has Lana play a pagan temptress in a biblical epic, The Prodigal. This is Lana's first film in CinemaScope. CinemaScope was one of the first iterations of the widescreen film lens. Lana was not a fan of The Prodigal. She did not like the role. She described the script as stupid and her skimpy characters' costumes as atrocious. The film got mediocre reviews, but it was followed 1 month later by the very successful film The Sea Chase, an adventure movie where Lana starred opposite John Wayne. The next 2 films that Lana makes are unsuccessful both with critics and audiences. And in February of 1956, MGM announces that they are not going to be renewing Lana's contract. At the time that MGM terminates Lana's contract, she had made the studio over $50 million. But Lana was not upset about this. She was not bitter. She was actually really excited because in her mind, being like a free agent was going to give her the opportunity to seek out more exciting and dramatic roles and the kind of roles that she wanted to play rather than always being told what she had to play. Later in 1956, Lana discovers that she is pregnant with her husband Lex Barker's child, but she suffers another tragedy when this child, a baby girl, is born stillborn at 7 months into the pregnancy. This is a low time for Lana, and it gets much, much worse when Lana experiences just one of the biggest nightmares of every mother when her daughter Cheryl, who's about 13 years old, confides in her that Lex has been molesting her. Now, this is the moment where I really fell in love with Lana Turner, because Lana, when she learns of this alleged abuse, not only does she believe her daughter, which is, yes, you should always believe your child if they tell you something like this. And sadly, there are some parents who don't, which is sick. But Lana does believe her daughter. And not only does she believe her daughter, but she chases Lex Barker out of her home at gunpoint. And, listen, if anybody deserves to be chased out of anywhere at gunpoint, it would be a child molester, an alleged child molester. So Lana divorces Lex, and in her fragile emotional state, she begins a relationship with a crazed superfan named Johnny Stompanato. Johnny Stompanato had been sending flowers and making phone calls to Lana using a fake name for months. And Lana didn't discover until she had already started seeing him that he was using a fake name. His real name was Johnny Stompanato, and he was a pretty notorious mafia character in Hollywood. When Lana finds out that he is this mafia character, she's told by a friend. She never names the friend, but the impression I got from it, and I don't know why, I just had an inkling that it was Frank Sinatra that was like, listen, I have an inkling. I have a feeling. I could be completely wrong, but in my mind, that's how I'm choosing to believe it. So I think Frank Sinatra is the friend that wisens her up to the fact that this person is this mobster. And when Lana finds out, she tries to break things off with Johnny, but he's very adamant and insistent about continuing the relationship, and their relationship becomes just like an on-again, off-again nightmare filled with violence, breakups, reconciliations, breaking up, making up, just, we all know the type. Yikes. One of these breakups occurs in September of 1957. Lana is filming the movie Another Time, Another Place opposite Sir Sean Connery. So she's filming in London, and Johnny flies to London to visit Lana. At first, they're having a good time. Everything seems nice, no big problems. But this all changes when Johnny tells Lana, hey, I want to come visit you on set. Well, quite obviously, Johnny has proven at this point to be pretty volatile. So who could blame Lana when she's like, no, I don't want you to visit me on set. So Johnny begins having an argument with Lana about this, and he chokes her. Lana's makeup artist, Del Armstrong, calls Scotland Yard to have Johnny deported. Like, he is like, okay, here's our plan, Lana. We're going to get him deported because he is a menace to society, and there is no way the UK is going to want this mobster who's choking people in their country. Unfortunately, Johnny finds out about the plan, and he, realizes, oh, they've called Scotland Yard on me. He catches wind of this, and he is furious. So Johnny decides to show up on set with a gun, threatening Lana and Sir Sean Connery, because he thinks that the reason Lana doesn't want him on set is that she's having an affair with Sean Connery. I'm sure that Johnny was just a real tough guy, especially considering how much he loves to beat up on women. I mean, that's a sure sign of a macho man. But I don't think there was ever a good day to wake up and decide to threaten Edinburgh's finest son, Sir Sean Connery. Johnny tried it though, and he immediately regretted it when Sean Connery himself grabbed the gun out of Johnny's hand, twisted his women-beating wrist so hard that Johnny ran off set, utterly humiliated. Turns out that the woman beater was no match when it came to meeting a real man. Johnny was later escorted by Scotland Yard to the airport, where he was sent back to the US because, they don't want that trash there. This will, however, not be the last time we hear of Johnny, but we will set him aside for a moment to discuss the film Peyton Place. A few months after the incident in the UK, the movie Peyton Place is released. This movie sees Lana in the leading role of Constance Mackenzie, a mother struggling to maintain the relationship with her teenage daughter. The movie is a blockbuster hit, which is fantastic news for Lana because Lana had agreed with the studio that rather than getting a set salary, she would instead get a percentage of the film's profits. So this film wins Lana quite a bit of cash, and it also wins her her first and only Academy Award nomination when she is nominated for Best Leading Actress. On the evening of March 26th, 1958, Lana attends the Academy Awards where she celebrates her nomination, and she also presents the award for Best Supporting Actor. Johnny is very upset that Lana does not invite him to the awards ceremony, and when she gets home from the Oscars, he is waiting at her house where he physically assaults her. Which, Johnny, you dear, flawed child of God, this is why she did not invite you to the Oscars. The last time you were near her work friends, you got schooled by Sir Sean Connery. So just maybe cut your losses and get some therapy. I'm not sure what happened to Johnny Stompanato as a child, but at this point he was adult, which means he is accountable for his actions because that is how civilized society functions. Lana sends Johnny home, but the next week he is right back at it. He shows up at her house around 8 p.m. on April 4th, 1958, and he begins arguing with Lana in her bedroom. During this argument, Cheryl, who is about 14 years old at this time, she's at home. She's in the next room watching TV. She can hear this argument. She hears it getting louder and louder. She hears Johnny getting angrier and angrier, and she starts to hear him threatening to kill Lana. Cheryl is scared that Johnny is going to kill Lana, which is reasonable. He has beaten Lana countless times. He has pulled a gun on her in front of witnesses, and he is now loudly threatening to kill her. There is legitimate, reasonable fear that he might kill Lana. So Cheryl runs to the kitchen and she grabs a knife. She takes the knife, she goes to the bedroom door, Lana's bedroom door, and she's standing on the other side of the bedroom door listening to this argument taking place. She's not sure if she should run in there or what. She is really scared. She's a little bit frozen, not sure what to do. And as she's waiting, Lana opens the door to push Johnny out, to try to usher him out of the house. As Lana pushes Johnny out of her bedroom door, she feels this force, and she thinks that Cheryl has punched Johnny. But she sees Johnny collapse to the floor and notices blood on his shirt. And it's at this point that she realizes Cheryl has stabbed Johnny. Johnny dies as a result of this injury, and this story becomes huge. It has everything. A Hollywood star, one of the most popular Hollywood stars of the time, a murder, and the involvement of Lana's teenage daughter as the supposed killer. This is a formula that is just made for media sensationalism. More than 100 reporters are in attendance when days later, on April 12th, 1958, there is a public inquest with 4 hours of testimony. The jury deliberates for only 25 minutes before deeming the killing a justifiable homicide. So there will be no charges against Lana or Cheryl. There is a period of intense press coverage following this incident. And around this time, Lana accepts the lead role in a movie called Imitates Life. This movie sees Lana play a struggling stage actress. Filming is incredibly difficult for Lana because she has just gone through an incredibly traumatizing period in her life. Can you imagine? In the span of 2 years, she has had a stillbirth. She's had a stillbirth. She has learned that her husband allegedly molested her daughter. She's been publicly abused by a mobster. She has exposed her daughter to this, which, of course has to be some guilt. That's a very difficult, she's a victim and also, responsible for protecting her daughter. So, it's just it's really awful. And then you add on top of this that her daughter, she now has to worry about her daughter being traumatized because her daughter has killed someone. And yes, it was in self-defense. Yes, it's justified, but that's still an incredible burden for anyone to carry, let alone a teenage girl. So The weight of all this is really intense, and it's not surprising that Lana begins having these panic attacks. The first of these panic attacks actually takes place on her first day of filming Imitation of Life. Lana's co-star in that movie, Juanita Moore, would later recall that after they filmed one scene where Moore's character dies, Lana spent 3 days crying almost like nonstop, to the point that she couldn't even work because her face and her eyes were so swollen. I can relate a little bit because I myself, when I cry, I puff up like a blowfish. I mean, I get puff-y with a capital E. Does this happen to everyone? I am curious. Let me know in the comments, are you a puffy crier too? I'm just curious if like everyone is a puffy crier, or if it's just a select percentage of the population that get to have this wonderful gift. Anyways, Imitation of Life is an incredibly difficult film for Lana to make, but it pays off when the film is released in the spring of 1959. Imitation of Life becomes one of the biggest films of the year and the biggest hit of Lana's career. Lana had once again opted to forgo a salary and instead receive a percentage of the film's profit, and whoa. Great idea. Ultimately, Lana earns more than $2 million from the film after it takes in $50 million at the box office. Both Peyton Place and Imitation of Life depicted a complicated relationship between a single mother and her teenage daughter. This very closely mimicked Lana's real life as a single mother. Around the time of the release of Imitation of Life, Lana's daughter Cheryl privately came out as a lesbian to her parents. Lana and her ex-husband Steve, Cheryl's father, were both very supportive of Cheryl. Despite this support, Cheryl did run away from home several times, and the press would often write about her rebellion. Cheryl had gone through a lot, and while Lana was not a great judge of men's character, she really was a good mother. She had believed Cheryl about the molestation. She had defended her. She was supporting her now when Cheryl was coming out at a time that was not commonplace. That was not something that was talked about a lot or very openly accepted in many households across the US. And Cheryl, she was really being accepted by her parents. And so during this time of rebellion, Lana is smart, and she recognizes that a good portion of this rebellion is likely because Cheryl is still suffering from trauma. So Lana sends Cheryl to a psychiatric treatment facility in Connecticut called the Institute of the Living. The Institute of the Living is actually incredibly well known for having treated the actresses Jean Tierney and Clara Bow. They also once treated Marsha Linehan. She is a psychologist who created a form of therapy known as dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT. I found this incredibly fascinating that Cheryl went to the same institute that would later treat the founder of DBT, because I have mentioned before that in my early 20s, I had a really difficult time. I struggled a lot with my own mental health, and DBT is actually the therapy that helped me come through that. It combines standard cognitive behavioral therapy with emotional regulation, acceptance, and mindfulness. I was referred to DBT after several years of traditional therapy, and it made a huge difference for me. So I'm actually incredibly grateful for Marsha Linehan, the founder of this. And it was incredibly interesting to see this connection between Lana Turner to Cheryl, to Marsha Linehan, to my own life. These coincidences and connections, I think, are great reminders of the fact that no matter what our walk of life is, no matter what our career is, no matter how different we may think our life looks from someone like Lana Turner, we all share this human experience. We share this earth, this moment of life, and we face the same struggles. Sometimes I think we don't see the similarities in others, and we can often dehumanize people that we think are successful or beautiful or glamorous, thinking that they don't have the same problems we do. But they do. Lana's daughter Cheryl makes great progress into healing her trauma while at the Institute, and Cheryl goes on to become a model, a restaurant owner, an author, and a breast cancer survivor. She was also a real estate agent, if I recall correctly. She is still alive. She resides in Palm Springs with her wife, Joyce Leroy. She has been with Joyce since 1971, when the two were introduced at a party by Marlon Brando. Like, that's so cool. Back to Lana. In November of 1960, Lana marries her fifth husband, Fred May. He was a rancher and a member of a wealthy family who had started a department store called May Department Store. Pretty obvious. Lana moves with Fred to a ranch in Chino, California, where they raise horses and other ranch animals. The next year, Lana makes her final film with MGM when she stars opposite Bob Hope in Bachelor in Paradise. This film is well received, and after making it, Lana is eligible to collect her full pension from MGM. In mid-1962, Lana and rancher Fred divorce, but they do remain friends for the rest of her life. Lana takes a bit of a break from acting, and in 1965, she meets and marries Hollywood producer Robert Eaton, who was 10 years younger than she was. This marriage lasted 4 years until Lana found out that Robert had been unfaithful, at which point she divorces him, and only weeks later, in 1969, yeah, I'm making a face because what comes next, Lana has bad taste in men, okay, we know that, but I was not prepared for this. Only weeks later, in 1969, Lana marries Ronald Pellar, a nightclub hypnotist. Lana. No offense to nightclub hypnotists, but Ronald is also a liar. He tells Lana that he has a PhD in psychology, which she had to kind of want to believe that lie, because who has a PhD in psychology and is working at Circus, like hypnotizing people into quacking like a duck? No one. Side note, I actually believe 100% that hypnotism can work in a therapeutic setting with a legitimate professional. I personally know people who have quit smoking through hypnotism, but I do not believe in liars like Ronald. Lana has only been married to Ronald for a very short time when she learns that he has stolen $35,000 that she had given him for an investment, which, if you can't trust a nightclub hypnotist, who can you trust? Lana filed for divorce from Robert in January of 1970, and she claimed to be celibate for the rest of her life. I do not blame her. I really think that was for the best. Ronald had been her seventh husband. She'd been married for a total of 8 times, and she would later famously say, "My goal was to have one husband and 7 children, but it turned out to be the other way around." During the 1970s, Lana appeared in a few films, but was mostly seen in the theater. In the later part of the decade, Lana struggled with an alcohol addiction that had begun in the late 1950s. It got so bad in the late 70s that Lana was down to only 95 pounds. Her final film appearance was the 1980 comedy horror film Witch's Brew. Around this time, Lana began practicing her Catholic faith once again. She had not been practicing for many years, but she experienced what she called a religious awakening, and she did begin attending Mass and confession once again. In 1985, Lana had her final on-screen appearance when she guest starred in an episode of The Love Boat. In the spring of 1992, Lana was diagnosed with throat cancer. She had surgery to remove the cancer, but doctors found that it had metastasized to her jaw and to her lungs. So she undergoes radiation and she does reach full remission, but the cancer returned in July of 1994. 2 months later, in September, Lana appeared at the San Sebastian International Film Festival in Spain to accept a Lifetime Achievement Award. This would be her final public appearance. 9 months later, Lana passed away At the age of 74 from complications of cancer, she was at home and her daughter Cheryl was by her side when she passed. Lana was cremated and her ashes were scattered in Oahu, Hawaii. Lana Turner was exalted in her life and in her death for being one of the most glamorous film stars of all time. Lana took great care to always look camera ready while working and while not working. Dorothy Kilgallen once wrote, "Lana Turner is a superstar for many reasons, but chiefly because she is the same off-screen as she is on. No one who adored her in movies would be disappointed to meet her in the flesh. The flesh is the same. The biography is as colorful as any plot she has ever romped through on screen. The clothes she wears are just like the clothes you pay to see her in on Saturday night at the Bijou. The physical allure is just as heavy when she looks at a head waiter as when she looks at a hero." Lana was also well known for having an incredibly strong female fan base, something that set her apart from other femme fatales of the same era. I think that part of that was her Aquarius appeal, that je ne sais quoi that makes you want to be her friend. I personally would have loved to be friends with Lana, and I would have been a heck of a friend to her. I'd have talked her to that damn hypnotist. Fun fact, she is now my absolute favorite. I'm not even kidding. There's some quality about her that just draws you in. Learning her life story, listening to her in interviews, watching her films, it just made me wish that I could sit down and have a drink with her. One leading lady who had many drinks, I'm sure, with Lana was Ava Gardner, who was one of Lana's closest friends. I did recently do an episode of Beauty Biography covering Ava Gardner's life. I will put that right here for you to watch if you haven't seen it yet. And I will put the entire playlist of Beauty Biography episodes right here. We're here every Friday with new episodes of Beauty Biography. I hope to see you there. And until then, you take care of yourself. Bye.